100 years ago, on December 17th, the Wright brothers launched the age of aviation with a short 12-second flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Although few people even knew about it at the time, it was an event of worldwide significance. Other things were happening too. The Ford Motor Company, Public Service Electric and Gas, and Crayola crayons were all formed. Bob Hope was born, as was the Harley-Davidson motorcycle. A few months earlier, a new community was incorporated in New Jersey. A small section broke off from the Township of Washington and incorporated under a new name. Although it didn't have the significance of the flight, that small community grew and became home to more than 7,000 people. Its population was largely German and Dutch, as was a good part of Bergen County. The area was originally called Kinderkamack, a corruption of an Indian word probably meaning uplands. The railroad, however, which came through around 1869, didn't like that long name for its timetable, so it changed it to Etna. Why they chose that name is unknown. This was the new name used for incorporation. A few years later, in 1909, the name was changed to Emerson. Now, 100 years later, flight has gone from a rickety craft aloft for 12 seconds to huge planes that fly thousands of miles. This community, too, has changed and grown. You will be seeing pictures that in some cases will illustrate how it was, followed by how it is or how it changed. At the time we were incorporated, there were no paved roads. Here are Old Hook Road, the intersection of Kinderkamack and Old Hook, and Ackerman Avenue. 3 churches, Union Church, and Assembly of God. 1 public school on Linwood Avenue. A hotel which also served for town meetings. Two rather grand estates, the Ackerman Angel House and the Ackerman Greer House. There were at least 8 homes dating to Revolutionary times. The Dearborn American Legion with its beautiful fireplace, the Hopper Rizzuti House at 308 Kinderkamack, the Demarest Hackbarth House in its earlier days, today, and a view of the worn steps. This was Liebe Kendall's on Kinderkamack Road. The Van Wagener House. There were a few small stores. Most of the area was farmland, but today only 1 small farm is left. Also, by 1903, dredging was in progress to create a reservoir for a public water supply. This photo shows the kind of log dam originally used. This created a lake and wooded area used for many years as a picnic ground. In 1891, a group of speculators from New York and New Jersey acquired large tracts in Etna. They advertised heavily in New York, and their target audience was Italians. They sold them on the idea that Etna was much like Basilicata, the area in Italy from which many of them came. Many of Emerson's families can trace back to that period. In 1905, only 2 years after incorporating, Etna formed its fire department. The first chief was H.B. Herring, who owned Block's Hall, now Emerson Hotel, and was a beer bottler. The first firehouse was on Linwood Avenue, where Municipal Place is now. And the earliest fire engines were, of course, horses and wagons. Their dress uniforms were a snappy red. Later the firehouse, which was also used for public meetings and events, was improved by adding a second floor and a hose-drying tower. As time went on, motor-driven trucks replaced the horses. The building became rather rickety and unsafe, so when the new Borough Hall was built by the WPA, it included 2 bays for fire trucks. It wasn't until the late 20s that we had a full-time police officer. His name was Joseph Biancoli, but he was known as Joe White. He was cited several times for bravery. Shown on his Indian motorcycle is Frank Salamando. In 2002, we got a new bike and came full cycle, pun intended. Behind Sylvia Smith in this photo is our police booth, which served as our police station. Life in the first half of the 20th century was slower, and our population slightly more than doubled in 25 years, from 681 in 1905 to 1394 in 1930. Even World War I didn't have much effect. These next few photos show how we looked in those early years. Did you notice tree-lined Kinderkamack Road? The surge came after World War II, with the peak being reached in 1970 when we had 8,400 residents. This surge created marked changes. We lost some of the oldest homes. This is the Van Wagoner house, and this is what is there now. The Armenians bought the old Pasquarella home. A new shopping center was built on Kinderkamack Road. It too is slated to be replaced. And later a second one on Main Street. We built our own high school. Assumption Parish built a magnificent new church. And the Jewish community built a new temple. A development of over 300 homes called Continental Woods went into an area that was a favorite hunting ground. The man in the snow is Murray Phillips, Emerson's own folk singer. Here's another shot of Murray and his wife Kit, an artist. Another development went into the northern side of Soldier Hill Road. We also added Allison Village off Kinderkamack Road and the Fairways. The growth of the borough pointed up the need for a library, so in 1958 a silver tea was held, headed by Ruth Bauer and Gloria Hartheimer for the Library Association. There was a book drive to gather books. The Biggs twins placed a sign near the new post office, where Paint and Paper is now. Betsy Scanlon, shown here in her home office, worked the newspapers. Her family was involved, as were many others. Julius Hamel was mayor in 1961. Brownie and Girl Scout troops were formed, and in 1963, one well-remembered hike was to explore the Indian Cave in Hillsdale. In 1964, the New Jersey Tercentenary was celebrated all across New Jersey. On Washington's birthday, in the snow, a ceremony was held, and Indians danced in loincloths and feathers. It took place in Washington Oak Park, an acre that had been set aside to preserve an old white oak during Washington's encampment in this area in 1780. Legend grew around this tree. Around 1965, an old barn on Locust Avenue, probably owned by the Ackermans, was dismantled. Large green bottles for winemaking were found inside. A sleek chrome diner was built on the corner where Dunkin' Donuts is now, again named after the Ackermans. For reasons unknown, the owners just walked away from it one day. The Heck farmhouse stood on what is now the ShopRite Mall. This fine example of American Gothic architecture was considered for a library. You can see what the decision was. Across Old Hook Road, where the entrance is to the 466 Medical Building, was the Noble Gnauk home. In 1973, Tom DeAncy, DPW superintendent shown second from the left, retired and was replaced by Perry Salamando on the right. A fairly new split level was raised, and Hudson City Bank went up on Kinderkamack Road. And finally, construction began, after a lengthy struggle, on our new library on Hillman Field. On March 17, 1974, it was dedicated.
In 1975 and 1976, the bicentennial of the United States was in full swing. In front of Borough Hall on April 19th, the shot heard round the world was celebrated. Shown here is Mayor Owen Cassidy on horseback, and Brownie Amy Caputo. A new oak tree was planted in April 1976 as a continuing link to the past, in case the old one ever came down. It had already lost one huge limb, which was 1/3 of the crown. We also placed a Bergen County historic marker at the railroad station commemorating the old name of Kinderkamack. Scenes around town at this time were John Bayman's Elixir truck, two women running for council, they won, and Mayor Cassidy performing the Ann Solbach wedding. A severe storm in 1979 brought down many trees, and some landed on houses. Wilson's on George Road, Palisade Avenue, Abrams on Sanford. Emerson has always done pretty well at football. Here are a couple of shots of the team and the band. An afternoon spent at Marrick's Old Hook Farm creates a look back in time. The old schoolhouse, which stood on the northeast corner of Old Hook and Sand Roads, was moved to this property in 1925 and is still being used, though not as a school, and creates a wonderful subject for photographers. The house itself dates to around or shortly after Revolutionary times. The two Marrick daughters are now grown, and one works in the city while the other helps at the farm. A disaster for tree lovers occurred in 1985. Hurricane Gloria brought down the magnificent old oak tree. The roots succumbed to dry rot, which befalls trees of this age. Children climbed all over it and collected acorns. Emerson even made the Channel 4 news. The upturned roots were well over Cliff Auguson's head. Bill Wassmann was finally able to count the rings, 341, which placed its beginnings around 1644. It measured over 5 feet across and 17 feet 4 inches around. Can you see the ghost of General George Washington in Bill's shadow? Renovations were begun on an old store by the tracks, and an identical one was built to the north. Today this street is called Emerson Plaza West. The Three Gables Bar became Harry Gus Lumber Company on Kinderkamack Road and is now known as Kuchen Brothers Lumber. The early buildings in the rear are still there. This is the birthplace of Helen Wolf in 1898, south of the railroad on Kinderkamack. Here she is as a young woman with her brother Richard. In 1993, we visited her in western New Jersey, and she shared a lot of historical photos and genealogy with us. Her family founded Emerson Quality Press, one of the oldest businesses in town. Early on, it got a big job for a bank, but before it could be completed, the press fell through the floor. Owen Cassidy alerted us to these two buildings on the ground of the Hackensack Golf Club. They appear to be fairly early and came down not long after these pictures were taken. The tragic death of a young Emerson man led to the establishment of Rosengart Park on Sunset Avenue. Notice the workers. In the early 1990s, the old Ackerman mansion, known as Albert's Folly, burned. For a time, it was Torino's restaurant. Here are some interior views showing the elaborate curved doorways and other features. The property is now a park, Garden of Our Lady of Joy. One of the next big events occurred in January 1996 when the Northeast struggled through a blizzard. These two pictures show the whims of the wind and snow, which was more than 20 inches. Even without a blizzard, snow transforms our beautiful pines into a place of beauty. Here also are the pines in summer. Speaking of pine trees, this magnificent white pine on the Hackbarth property on Locust Avenue is the only one of 10 surviving. They were planted around 1917, so before long it will be a century old. Here is the Borough Hall decorated for the holidays. What would a program be without human interest? This was Barry Kaplan's 40th birthday. A dozen years have passed. This wooden Canada goose was carved from the stump on which it stands, never ever to cause problems for anyone. At first glance, this was a little disconcerting. The town picnic is held every year on Memorial Day weekend. Hey, Gene, take it easy. Jim Wagner, our town's tree expert, keeps a lovely flower event going all summer. For many years, the fish truck was a landmark in town. Doesn't every town have an elephant in its history? And so we have tried to start as far back as we could, probably over 200 years, to bring you up to our time and our knowledge of how we look now. It is a far cry from wooden paths, muddy roads, and a few early sandstone houses that dotted our area. It is, of course, by no means complete, nor can it be, but these familiar places need no explanation. This is the way we were, this is the way we are now.
Happy birthday, Emerson!